Welcome, everybody. I'm pleased to introduce Niels Gott, who has a great talk for us today about positive psychology. Niels is an Agile coach here in the Twin Cities. And then, Niels, anything else you want to say about yourself before we dive in?
I think that covers the bases. I'll share a few more things as I'm talking as well. That's perfect. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
I'll start sharing my screen. Hopefully, I'm going to share the right screen. Bear with me just a moment. And is that coming through?
Yep, we've got the Bounce Back Better system.
Perfect. So as Chris mentioned, I'm an Agile coach here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and I'd love to talk to you today about resilience and positive psychology. This is an intro to positive psychology. Bashak and I are both taking some certificates through the Flourishing Center, one of which is the Bounce Back Better training system. And I appreciate you letting me talk to you about this today. The intersection between resilience and positive psychology and games, I think, is pretty easy to draw. Part of why I enjoy Agile games, part of why I enjoy Agile, is that in my view, it comes from a place of optimism and a place of novelty and a place of having fun. And so as I'm going through this certificate program, we are just inundated with barrels of content, and I'd love to be able to share some of that with you. This deck is from Emilia Zhivoltovskaya, who is one of the MAP graduates. She was in the second graduating class from UPenn with a master's in applied positive psychology. I had looked at MAP, but that is a super expensive program and very academic. And there's Bashak's little one. Hey, I guess got shy. But nonetheless, I'll tell you a little more about my resilience journey in just a second as well. And so again, I feel like resilience, positive psychology, and Agile games all have a great intersection. I don't have a ton of games for you today, but I do want this to be a little bit interactive. There is a ton of content in this slide deck, and so I don't want to lecture at you. So if it gets dull or boring, stop me, tell a joke, any of those things. Really, what I would love to hear as we work through this is your stories, because we are all resilient creatures and you all have fascinating stories. And so that's part of what I want to be able to pull out of today. So with that said, here is the agenda that I've got in mind, just to talk about what is resilience, why it matters, and how to build it. And in particular, it matters in the Agile space. As Chris had mentioned, as we were coming on, this meetup started in early 2020, before we had any idea that the pandemic was about to turn the world upside down. And I feel like if we've learned anything in the last couple of years, for me, it's at least a couple things. It's one, that resilience matters, but two, it's that Agile's time is way overdue. I feel like it's really shown a spotlight on some of the things that are broken in our ways of working globally. And it's really, I think it's made it clear that we have to have a more people-centered approach to how we work. And for me, one of those ways is about resilience and positive psychology. So resilience is a teachable mindset, is the good news. And I'm sure as Agilists, you have talked, those of you that are Agile coaches have talked a lot about mindset over the years. And so I don't think that it'd be any surprise to you that mindset is something that we can have some impact on, and it is teachable. And I also feel that it's definitely a skill set that is essential for well-being and success. And learning these skills helps us gain some personal mastery and be able to handle whatever life throws our way. So the way that this program is designed is that we're talking a little bit about resilience today. There are some other building blocks, and I don't want this to feel like a sales pitch. And so I'll probably just mention those very briefly at the end of this deck. But the way that this program is designed, there's a bunch of different skills that we can work with, starting with resilience, because it's the most obvious when we talk about positive psychology. And we've got a bunch of other slides here that talk about some of the science that go into it, but we'll get to those in just a moment. So I'll tell you my brief resilience story. I discovered positive psychology about 12 years ago when I was still serving in the Army National Guard. I served for almost 22 years. I was a company commander in 2009, 2010, 2011. And during that time frame, our brigade was facing a deployment. What I didn't want to happen as a company commander is that part of my company would be split up and sent away, and I would be left home in the rear. But unfortunately, that is exactly what happened. Um, the mission changed, and so I had to send 12 soldiers to Afghanistan with the 45th out of Oklahoma, and I had to send another dozen soldiers to Kuwait. But the good news was, as that was happening, because certainly, again, as a company commander, I didn't want to see my company broken up and split apart. I definitely felt like I had no more control to take care of my soldiers, which I viewed as central to my role as a company commander. But the Army gave me this set of training material that they were calling resilience training skills. I'd never heard of it before. I was blown away that the Army of all institutions was giving this to me, because it was certainly grounded in all kinds of skills for my soldiers to be more adaptable. And of course, fun side note for anybody that doesn't know, Agile was almost called adaptable back when those guys got together and wrote the Agile Manifesto in 2001. I think Jim Highsmith already had a book called Adaptable Software Program Management or something like that. And so, as I understand it, there was some debate on whether Agile is the right word or adaptable is the right word. And I don't think they wanted Jim to get all the business, so I think they changed it to Agile. Anyway, if you didn't already know that, you're welcome. That's Robert Widener taught me that fun trivia fact. But getting back to resilience, I was very grateful for these skills that I had to teach my soldiers. And so fast forward to where we are now, when I got out of the military, that's what led me on becoming a coach. And that's what led me to Agile. And that's what led me to positive psychology. But there's other things that happen. And I think we all have stories of adversity that we've faced. I think a big one for me as I was serving was when I lost my mother to cancer in 2005. And as you'll notice, the date there is April 9th. My birthday is April 8th, and she passed at 1 a.m. in the morning on April 9th. So I'm quite certain. She was pretty lucid all the way up until very near the end. And I'm quite certain that she didn't want to pass on my birthday. It seemed pretty obvious that she was trying hard not to have that happen. Of course, those dates are inextricably linked in my mind, just because that's such a huge personal change. My mom and I got very close towards the end of her life, for lots of stories, for lots of reasons. I don't know that we have time to get into all those stories, but it was a bittersweet end of her life because we had finally reconnected. There's lots of other history, too many words at once, sorry. There's lots of other family stories in that history that we can't quite get into right now. But that's a piece of my history. What I'd love to know is, what's your story? What brought you here? And we'll get into in just a minute an activity where we talk about what area of your life would you like to be more resilient in. I'm also curious what you'd hope to learn. And as I mentioned at the outset, I'm very interested in your stories. We're 10 after the hour, and the amount of content in this deck would very easily take the whole hour, and that is not my intent, because that would not be very fun. But I do want to pause and just get some feedback from you all. And you don't have to go as deep as talking about deaths in your family if that doesn't feel comfortable. I mean, it's been quite some time since my mom passed, so that pain is not as raw. It's always with me, but it's still there. What brought you here? What gets you interested in positive psychology? What do you hope to learn? What do you think about resilience? I think I heard something, but I didn't quite understand it. Can you say that again? Bishak.
This is a difficult question. I also ask myself, what is my story about resilience? And I couldn't find a very influential story about my history, but maybe I can mention about my career change. By the way, I'm from Turkey, and we are in the same class with Niels, CAP, Positive Psychology class, and also B3 Resilience class. So nearly for 18 years, I was working for a private bank in Turkey, one of the biggest banks. And also, do you know BBVA in Spain? BBVA also bought that national bank, and we were a global bank. And I was the manager in a branch. But one day I decided to change my old career. I was graduated from economic school in Turkey, and I decided to do my Master of Science in Edinburgh, Human Resource Management. And while I'm doing that, my main concern was to lead people better, because I was working with large teams, and the banking sector in Turkey is very stressful. You have to accomplish your goals monthly, and if you don't do that, they can quit your job. So that's such a stressful job. And you have to manage all the people, you have to lead your team, you have to manage your customer. So lots of stress. And sometimes I felt like that my values are not the same as my company's values. Because you have to push people every time. There are lots of extrinsic motivation factors, and they lose their intrinsic motivation and they burn out easily. So I was interested what's going on inside human being. So human resource management was the first step. And then I stepped into the area of psychology. I did my second Master of Science in Industrial and Organizational Psychology in Middle East Technical University. And while I was reading about goal theory, etc., I find myself in the Martin Seligman's web page. And that was the first time I heard about positive psychology. And then I quit 3 years ago. I established my own company. It's a software company. It first started as an ERP software company and as a startup, and I sold that company to an investor last year. And then I started to develop with my team a positive psychology app for Google Store and Apple Store. So it was not easy for me to change the whole career, because I was a candidate of C-level manager in that bank, and everybody was very surprised because I left everything behind me. And my father said that that's a kind of very stupid thing that I'm doing. Because I had a career in that bank and I risk everything for my dreams. And I was resilient, I think.
I think so, Bishak. I mean, that's what I'm struck by, is that you started out by saying you felt like you had some difficulty identifying resilience in your own life, but as you tell this career arc, to me, that's all about resilience. I mean, especially when you realize that your values don't match the company's. Man, that I feel that resonates with me. I've run into that a couple of times, and that is just a crappy place to be. I can't live that way. I've decided that I'm not going to live that way, in fact. So when you describe feeling that way, it brings up all kinds of emotions for me, which require resilience for sure. But then as you talk about your father telling you what a stupid decision that was to change careers, I mean, these things all require resilience. I think it's a fantastic story. What's your perception now, having shared that with us?
I think the problem is that I cannot see my skills like metacognition. Maybe because it's a part of me. Nobody taught me how to be resilient, so it comes inside me, and I was both afraid to make that change. It was not easy, but also I had the courage. So I believe that, as Emilia told us, the story of Purna, I have it inside me, and I need only best friends and family members to set by me, because that's all I need. And now I feel like that there are people most of the people feel the same thing. They have the resilience in themselves, but they cannot exert it. So maybe that's one of the main purpose of my life. We have the things, the tools inside us, but as time passes, we forgot them. We used to live in a habitual zone, and so we need motivation of others, I think. That's
Well
why
said.
I'm here, Niels. I need a motivation because you introduced that class, and I'm going to do it in Turkey too. So that's why I'm here.
That's fantastic. I love it. Well,
Thank
I think you've previewed a couple of themes that I want to get to as well. Not just what is resilience, but this is a picture of Chris Peterson, who unfortunately has passed away. But not only does he say that resilience is about the ability to struggle well, but the other thing that he says is that other people matter. And so that's what I'm thinking about as well, as you share that piece, Bashak, is about the motivation that we get from other people. Other people definitely matter. So let's dive into the definition for just a moment. And then we'll get into a piece that you actually mentioned as well, Bashak, that you said something about not having been taught about that we do have a lot of these skills intrinsically. And that is absolutely true. That I think we are, again, very resilient creatures, whether we recognize that or not, but the mental toughness is not taught to us. And so we'll talk about that in just a second. So to make it short and sweet, the definition of resilience is simply that it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And these can run the gamut. So of course, as I was talking about dealing with my soldiers being taken away from me or losing my mom, those are kind of big ones, but difficulties happen all the time, whether it's just yesterday, I was emailed a spreadsheet, and apparently someone thinks I'm a project manager and that I require I'm required to provide a lot of status updates and really get into the details for something called a project quality review that a lot of people with fancy titles are going to be looking at. That was an opportunity just yesterday for me to exercise some resilience. But another way that it's put, so Dr. Karen Rivich calls it the ability to persevere in the pursuit of one's goals despite obstacles and setbacks. Those of you that know me know what a dork I am. I happen to have this book. It's a little bit dog-eared and weathered. I actually got this back at that same time frame when I talked about being a company commander and my soldiers were getting split up. And I was learning about resilience. I was super curious. I had to go grab the book. This is not written for soldiers. It's written a little more like a self-help book, not necessarily a bad thing, but Karen Rivich was also at UPenn, I believe, and is one of the big thinkers in positive psychology. We've already sort of talked about the fact that we are resilient creatures. That is quite literally true. As a matter of fact, apparently, I haven't validated this for sure, but scientists estimate that something like 99.99% of all species that have ever lived are extinct today. So congratulations, you've made it. Clearly, you are resilient somehow. And I think that deserves a pat on the back. And I guess as I've been studying this more, there are other ways that our body is literally physiological, very resilient. So if you break a bone, as that bone grows back, it actually grows back stronger. And apparently the way that the body layers on calcium on that break, that you won't break it in that same spot again. You could break your arm again, but it won't be that exact same spot because of the way that the body repairs itself. And so what we are attempting to do with positive psychology and with resilience is apply this same sort of build back to the mental side of our lives, as we've already sort of given preview to, because each day we've got all kinds of myriad of stressors that come our ways. And I'm sure as those of you that are agile coaches, you've seen that a lot as well. So what we're proposing is that we figure out how to take our brain to the gym. And the reason why is because what some of these studies have shown us is that people that have a higher degree of resilience tend to be more successful. They tend to be able to persevere and persist longer in the face of adversity. And I think we've heard of grit I love Angela Duckworth's work, but I think that the other piece of this is that it's not just powering through. Grit is also about maintaining passion for your goals. And this is what helps us to achieve personal mastery, well-being, and hopefully flourishing, as the name of the organization that Bashak and I are both studying at, the Flourishing Center. It's all about flourishing. The other piece is that this is also about showing up in the world the way that you want to. Uh, this has already been a piece of my philosophy as a coach naturally, and I suspect that this may resonate with a lot of you as well, that being a coach, I don't know if everybody on the phone is a coach, but I know several of us are, certainly in the Agile space. Part of that is modeling the behavior that you'd like for your team to be able to understand and emulate. And so resilience and positive psychology helps us do that. But it also helps us digest emotions without getting stuck. I know this graphic is perhaps a little bit silly, but the point is that we need to be able to handle the myriad of emotions. But I mean, all emotions are important. So, for example, sadness. It helps us recognize the loss of something important. It helps us process through grief. But if we get stuck in sadness, that can lead to depression. It can lead to all kinds of problems. Worry is another one. Worry helps protect us because it helps us problem solve in order to prevent something bad from happening. But if we get stuck in worry, that can lead to anxiety. I know several of us are from Minnesota, and so you might have heard of Nora McInerney. I think she moved to Austin during the pandemic, but she has a lot of fantastic work about grief and how it's not something you just get past. Is something that you go through. And she's got an incredible story that she talks about losing her husband and how she processed that and what reintegrating into work looked like going through that. And so I think that's always an incredible example of how we properly digest emotions. So I'm just looking at all of the slides that I've got here because there are a whole bunch, but there's a couple that I'm really excited to share with you. And I think some of it is with the history of resilience. So what some of these studies have figured out that it doesn't require superhuman strength. Rather, it's really about some of the ordinary magic that each of us can show up with each day. But I think the thing that's most fascinating is that adversity is necessary for success. And so I'm not sure if this slide is building. I think it's supposed to build, but the point is that we need to have some challenge in our lives in order to be successful. And people have, there's a particular study, and I don't know if it'll show up on screen. It's the print's probably super small, but this was in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. What this is trying to show is that the top curve is life satisfaction, but some of the bottom curves are, so this one with the triangles on it, that is post-traumatic stress symptoms. This one with the bubbles is functional impairment. This other one is global distress. So you can see that life satisfaction is highest when there is some stress. Now there's a tipping point where it's too high down here and it's too high again over here. And so that life satisfaction really tapers off where those intersect. But some stress is necessary. This is, it's not nothing. And so I'm no statistician, and I'm just taking the abstract for what it says in the study. But the point is that we need some adversity in our lives in order to be successful. There's also some work that shows us that growth is incredibly important coming out of stress. We can have post-traumatic stress disorder, which we like to talk about in the military, but we can also have post-traumatic growth where we are able to come back stronger and bounce back better, as this program is called. I don't know if anybody knows Andy Nelson, but he tells a great story of his own journey going through cancer in particular, and how he came back and it really changed his life. And how, while he wouldn't wish cancer on anyone, he wouldn't give it back for the world just because of everything that's made possible for him, not the least of which is really following his dream to become an executive coach himself and to bring that story to lots of folks. So that's just one I think of right off the top of my head, but growth is absolutely possible when we think about adversity. All right, I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking, so I want to share one more thing, and then I'd love to ask you some more questions. Getting back to the life satisfaction piece, Sonia Lyubomirsky's got, this is a book I don't happen to have, but it's one that's on my wish list. But she talks about the pieces of our lives that are under our control. And so she references a study of 2,000 twins that were separated at birth. And apparently this work came through the Minnesota Twin Registry. And it showed that about 50% of life satisfaction was attributable to genetics, but a good 40% was due to intentional activities, what you think, what you do, what you feel. And then another 10% is just sort of due to the situation that you're in, kind of the external events that happen. So that means that 40% is totally under our control about what we think, how we feel, and what we do. And so that's why I'm talking to you today, is that I feel like this is our opportunity to focus on how we can get past the languishing that we've heard.
Let's see that again, please. Sorry.
Yeah. Was that a question, or is that a
one that you went past? I wanted to see that again.
This one?
No, the other one.
This one. The helpful thing is that this is also being recorded as well. And so I think we'll distribute the link to everyone after the fact. So I don't mean to blast through any of these too quickly. Are you getting what you need there, Samuel? Or did you have another question about it? If you're talking,
I've got what I need.
Okay, fantastic. Glad to hear it. All right, so that feels like a lot of lead up to how we can be more resilient. So this is the one last slide I'll show you, and then we can get into some discussion and wrap for our time today. Of course, I think everybody's familiar with Pixar, big animation studio, produces lots of great movies all the time, which my kids are big fans of. But if you take a look at the story arc, inevitably there's a main character once upon a time, and every day they did a thing until one day something happens. And because of that, it makes something possible. And because of that, something else is possible. And usually there's a couple of these, and because of that, until finally the big character change in the story. And ever since then, happily ever after. And so that's really what we're going for in the resilience world. So I'm going to stop sharing. I usually try not to talk that much without having an activity built in. But I'd like to know what your Pixar story is. I think we don't always think of our lives in that way, but real life is often much more interesting than the stories that Pixar or anyone else tells us. And if you dig deep for just a moment, you can find your Pixar story. So I'd like to pause and just give you a moment to think about a point in your life where you were in that one day until suddenly something happens, and then the impact that came back with that. So I'll give you a moment to think about that, and then I'd like to have some discussion around that. Hey, Ed, I think I didn't see you because I was in full screen. Good morning, how are you?
Niels, I think I've got mine, if you're looking for people
I'd
to
love
share.
to hear it, yeah.
Yeah, so my like once upon a time and everyday kind of thing was going to work, was, found the agile space, which was great, was really enjoying that. In the back of my mind, ever since I was like probably 16, I had planned that the work that I was doing was just to fund real estate investing and buy a bunch of rental property and then retire early and just make money off of rent, basically. And I was doing that. I had 10 rental units at 3 different properties. I was doing pretty well with it. And then I joined this coaching program that Niels and I did together at the University of St. Thomas. And one of the things I was getting coached on by my peers was around stress, and just being kind of overworked and burned out. And one of those practice coaching sessions with one of the other students in a class, I had the moment where I realized that the goals I had for myself were no longer relevant. They weren't the same thing. I didn't want the same thing anymore. Like I was under this, I was working to build up this side business in order to quit my job and not work. And I realized I love what I do. I really enjoy being a coach. I really enjoy being an agile coach and working with teams and people. And that's not something that I want to give up. And what it's costing me right now is time away from my family when my kids are still really little, and they want to actually be around me. And so that was kind of an aha moment. And within a couple of months, we'd put all the property on the market. We sold everything, and I think I closed on selling the first property on what most people think of as their last day in the office before COVID, that Friday in March of 2020. And it ended up being a really fortunate time for me to get out of rental property. But that was sheer dumb luck. But I don't think I've ever been happier. I know the smart financial thing would have been to hold on to that property for the next 10 or 15 years and be able to retire early and all of that. But it wasn't the right decision. It was a goal that a younger version of me had, that a different version of me had. And I don't owe that person anything. I owe everything to myself and my future. So I think that was kind of my, then one day kind of moment.
I love that one. And I remember being on the sidelines as that happened. I feel like I was next to that conversation as that.
Oh, I'm sure you were. I'm sure you were part of one of those. Like it was several coaching sessions over several class periods, and I'm sure you and I were in a coaching group together at some point for part of that. So you're definitely part of that story.
Love that story.
I love that story too. That was so positive and just a great. I'm happy for you hearing that story.
Well, and the timing was incredible. The way that the closing happened. I mean, if you could have planned that, I mean, that's the thing that blew me away about it afterwards. It was like, oh my man, that's because then of course everything dipped after that. And I can only imagine how tough it would have been to sell and close after the pandemic had started.
Yeah, there were all the rent moratoriums and people, not a pain. So covering mortgages for a couple of months would have been not a fun experience. So it was, again, just dumb luck.
It's also relatable when you just talked about how, after having kids, things changed. And so I always think about these things, like our life just being chapters, and every chapter is something different. And like the season of life that you're in, things could just be totally different. Right now my life is consumed with kids events and other things. And I know in about 6 years, it'll be different. So I'll probably have different goals in mind. So it's definitely relatable what you were talking about.
Something that comes to my mind when we're talking about resilience is I think of like a big inflatable ball. And if you like push on it, it goes boop, it bounces back. You get that same ball shape. But I'm not sure if that's really what we're talking about here completely. And like you talk about how we're designed to be resilient and how most species are now extinct, but we're here. Well, the reason why we're here is because, according to popular theory, at least, is that we evolved. Like that, first there was some other organism that did really well in some circumstances, but the environment changed and that organism fundamentally changed. And like what Chris is talking about is, in a way, the fundamental thing was, Chris, you wanted to be happy and you thought that being able to retire early and not work would be that solution to that. But then you realized that there was something else that could bring you happiness, and it was a different tactic that you used to achieve the same goal. So the ultimate thing is one, being happy, but as you're pointing out, it's like we do change. And so it's a question to me is, do we really want to be resilient? Do we want to be that ball that just bounces? Are we really trying to just keep the status quo? Or do we have to let go and say, I'm no longer a ball and that's okay. Like now I've changed shape, but there's this fundamental piece of me that's satisfied. And then it can be tricky because what is that fundamental piece? And is there really anything that stays the same?
This is some deep metaphysical stuff for those of us in the central time zone, not even 9 o'clock. I really love where you're going with that, Sharon. And I think at first I was really taken with the image of the ball and pushing at it, because in a sense, that's a little bit of what resilience is about. But I think what you've made clear is that we do change. We're constantly changing. And there's several things that brings up for me. For one, I'm thinking about the military again and redeployment and really my first reintegration. So my first deployment was in 2000. And as we were coming back in 2000, late 2000, the process for us to reintegrate was not very, it wasn't as well developed as it became in the decades after that. But one of the first things they did say, well, at least they wanted us to recognize that we had changed, and they've actually made us write that down. You have changed, because a lot of us had the perception that we're just going to go back to where we were, pick up where we left off, go back to our loved ones, go back to our jobs, and everything's going to be the status quo. It's just the way it was. But what the military, at least it's seen up to that point, is that is absolutely not the case. And that misalignment of expectations is what really causes a lot of difficulty with the reintegration. And so with my subsequent deployments, the process was a lot more intentional, which is good. But that's always been in my mind of the expectations that we have of the status quo and what normal is and how we're trying to get back to normal. The reality is that's a fiction that we've created that we're never going to get back to. And so I think the important part is, how do we want to change, and how do we want to show up, and what do we want to be intentional about? That's the other thing that I'm taking from resilience, is that it's about bouncing back in that moment. So resilience is all about on the spot types of actions that we take to be more clear about how we want to show up. In the broader spectrum of positive psychology, resilience is a piece of it. It's one of the biggest pieces that I really enjoy, but it's also about being north of neutral. So I really like what you're talking about in terms of happiness, because I think there's a couple of things that we myths that we sort of take as fact about happiness. But what I'm finding most surprising is that pursuit of happiness really is one of the most important things. And so it's I mean, and I'm not to get carried away with the Constitution of the United States, but I find it incredible that that's actually how they started the Declaration of Independence, was, the pursuit of happiness, that being an inalienable right to all human beings, that, 3 centuries ago, they recognized that. There is something about the anticipation that happens in our brains, that is actually, our brain doesn't recognize the difference between the anticipation and actually experiencing the event. And so the anticipation of the event is what really drives us. But I'm really fascinated with that pursuit of happiness, because I think that drives a lot of the things that we do, whether it is getting a lot of rental properties, with the idea that this is how we want to be. As we get new information and as we change, of course, we have to change direction and be more intentional. But I feel like I'm on my soapbox and off on a tangent, but some of the things you're saying really resonate with me. So. I do have some fancy graphics somewhere else about that north of neutral concept, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to find them quick enough for it to be useful.
Niels, maybe while you're looking there, one thing that came up for me thinking about resilience is back to like the concept of games, and how games, and when they're really good, live in that middle zone where you can be resilient. They're not so easy that it's not a challenge. They're not so difficult that you don't feel like you can recover from it. All the best games walk that line super, super well of having it be a challenge, but an inviting challenge that's exciting to overcome it. And it feels like as you were showing all those graphs and everything, showing that kind of middle zone where resilience lived, like for me, that's where all the best games live, and any terrible games live on the outsides of that. Either it's too hard or it's way too easy, and they aren't fun games to play.
That makes me think of, this is going to be super dumb, Candy Crush. I used to play that, and then the games got stupid hard, and I was like, why am I wasting my time playing this stupid game?
Yeah. Yep, it has shifted from here over just outside of that happy middle part of the graph.
Yep. This isn't exactly the thing I was thinking of, but I did want to share this with you real quick, because this is a friend of mine who is also in the course. This is the piece that she came up with from Ed Diener. But happiness is not just a place, but a process, an ongoing process of fresh challenges, getting back to the games, and it takes the right attitudes and activities to continue to be happy. I think in her deck, this is what I was looking for towards the beginning, about the difference between traditional psychology and positive psychology. Positive psychology is not about just everything's puppy dogs and rainbows. It's I think that what we have seen is sort of Susan David talks about this, the toxic positivity, where people try to dismiss the bad and try to just happy wash that away. But adversity actually is an important part of life. And so positive psychology is about working with the negative while accentuating the positive, focusing on strengths. And so it's kind of on this continuum between illness and wellness. And the other thing that I'm finding is that wellness is really about a state of being. It's not a static thing. But that was the one that I was looking for. That's not quite the one I was looking for. And the one that I had in mind, I'm not finding. So I'll stop sharing. But I do love this quote. Happiness is not just a place, but a process. Getting back to that anticipation thing. But all right. So what else is showing up for you all? Was this what could we have done better with this information? Is there an insight you're taking away? What's available to you now that you didn't have 45 minutes ago? Clearly, I've put everyone to sleep again. I have that impact on people.
Missed the first like 10 minutes or whatever, 15 minutes. So I'm bummed.
We have a recording, Ed. You can watch
Yes,
it.
that's awesome. Yeah, to evoke back to just my last comment on Joseph Campbell, if you're familiar with his work, The Hero's Journey, is like the call to adventure. It's like there's that impetus, that event, that sets that your normal, your status quo is no longer, it's no more, and then that's the call to adventure pushes you forward, and even though you resist the call, just the way of the world, of the event, of the journey, is that it continues to pull you forward through that journey. And sometimes it's kicking and screaming, and other times it's with delight. And I think the resilience lives in that zone of how you respond to it. And I think this is a big thing about who you journey with, right? And that's the importance of a mentor. Even in the hero's journey, is like that. The senior wizard that comes and teaches you the thing that you need, right? But then leaves you on your own, or you get mad at the wizard and say no. That's the journey, right? So discovering those secrets and walking that process, but it is a process, right? Because you feel called back to the status quo, and it's easy at sometimes to just to go with the languishing part. It's like it was easy to live in Hobbiton, where everything was so nice. Yeah, and so yeah.
I love that, Ed. Well said.
And I also thought that if you set higher goals and if you take risks, then it's important for you to find your vulnerability, to face with your vulnerability, and if you are vulnerable enough, then you can flourish, and that's all about, I think, resilience. But if you don't take risks, if you set lower goals, if you don't move from your comfort zone, then you'll never feel vulnerable and least likely to grow, I think. That's my summary, Niels, and thank you. And every time I listen to you, I thought about you, that you have to be on the screen. For example, news speaker or or podcast.
Well, fun fact.
You are very talented with your voice.
That's very kind of you, Bashak. I do have my podcast room back here that
Oh,
someday I'll
really?
actually start recording from, but I appreciate that, Bashak.
That's awesome. What's your podcast?
Oh, I don't know yet. I've had a few different we'll see what I actually get started with. I've had a few different ideas, but I will start a podcast, if not several. It's been something that I've wanted to do for a very long time. Oh yeah, Chris did find once upon a time I had an agent actually, and he found my voice acting page. I had an agent in St. Paul, and she closed down her business after like 25 years. You know, as that industry has continued to change, it's very easy for voiceover actors to get started on the internet without any representation at all and charge almost nothing. And so that industry has gone through a lot of change. But I did do that as a side hustle for a little while. Had a lot of fun with it as a hobby. But thanks again, Bashak.
Is it your natural voice or you trained your voice?
I've been asked that a lot of times in my life. Yes, this is the real deal. It's not, I mean, I did get a degree in speech comm, but speech communication, ironically, was much more about writing and was much more about the message than it was actually training my voice. So I was on the radio for a little while when I was getting my undergrad. I worked for Rock 95, the rock station, did that for a hot minute. And then I was also on KDSU, the Valley's best jazz, news, and blues. So those ones I did kind of mess with my voice a little bit, but otherwise, no, this is it.
So how do you tie in your journey or not journey with that room that you've got behind you with your unpodcast, but great speaking skills and everything? How does that tie in with this resilience? How do you interpret that?
Well, so, you know, I did have that space for when I was recording, but now as it's become clear to me that positive psychology is really where I want to spend all of my energy and all of my time, that's where I want to come back to, is to be able to use some of that talent to be able to have great conversations about resilience, about positive psychology. And so that's where it will go next. It's not a fully formed plan just yet. So
I feel like that's a thing for us all. We all have like kind of this like ghost in the closet, which is like this amazing place in our lives that we've like almost hidden the best part of us or the most refined part of us. And that at some point the journey will come back around to it. But for a time, it's like a season, right? It's like winter there. And that's a tough one because we're like, oh man, I'm really talented at that. But this is not apparently what's necessary right now. And it's hard because you're like, man, this is the best part of me. Why are we putting that aside?
And Niels, I have a perfect idea for you if you buy it.
of course, I'm curious.
You can share resilience stories on your podcast with the guests. You can invite the guests, and the guests can tell their resilient stories. How does it sound?
I love that. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, that's it. That's the idea.
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I thought it's fantastic too.
I think that's.
I'm proud of myself.
I think that's my new final project for CAP. I'll switch that.
Yeah, great.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I mean, that's what I've got. I really appreciate you all sharing. This has been delightful. And I really appreciate you putting up with me for the past most of an hour and sharing your insight and your stories along the way. And if you would like to be on this upcoming podcast, by all means, let me know.
Yeah, you can sign me up for sure. Thanks a lot for being here, Niels. This is great. Thank you all for coming, and have a great month. We'll see you again next month.
Wait, hey, Chris, I can put a plug in for next month's game.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So next month, June, we're gonna have a special event game. It won't be on a Thursday morning next month because we are doing an in-person event. And the person who can facilitate is Bill Farmer, and it'll be on Tuesday, June 7th. I will be posting the event here pretty soon. And the game that he's facilitating is the beer game, which if you've read The Fifth Discipline, there's like a chapter or section where they talk about this issue with the beer supply chain. And Bill has the equipment to facilitate that activity in person. So we're going to run through that. We have to have, in order to play the game and actually get something out of it, we have to have 2 teams of 4. So if you're able to RSVP and, let us know that you can make it, that would be awesome. And it'll be at 4 p.m., I believe, at Osborne, did I pronounce that right? University. So like I said, stay tuned. The details are coming. I'm hoping to have them out today or tomorrow for you. So
awesome. I'm looking forward. I will. I should be able to be there. So I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing some of you in person. It's been far too long.
And to put in another plug for this game, like this is a game that's featured in this best-selling book, and it's been played many times, and it always goes the same way. So like if you go and play this game, you will, play it the way that's predicted, even though you'll think that you're doing something, you're kind of, you're beating the system, but you're not. Everyone always kind of has, or usually has, an epiphany when they play this game. And Bill Farmer is going to be an excellent facilitator. I mean, this guy is all over the map in terms of how accomplished he is in many various areas. And one of those things is he was many years in improv. He was like serious improv guy. But then he like went to MIT and got a PhD, and he does all kinds of scientific. I mean, I don't even understand all his abilities. But I would just like want to highly plug this game. If I'm in town, I'm definitely going to go. And you would really be missing out by not going to this thing. It's a really good opportunity.
Sure. That's rolling.
I fly out the next day, so I think I can make it. I'm going to try to make it.
Yeah. Yep. Like I said, I'll have everything posted. I'll post it to Slack and the meetups channel and all of those things. So lots of visibility.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great month. We'll see you on Slack, and otherwise we'll see you in person in early June.
All right. We'll see everyone. Bye.
Can't wait. Do well.